Hello and welcome to episode 428 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Parrott, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many others. Again, Bill, I did it without looking at the notes.
You should by now, Seth.
I think.
Yeah. And it's a very frigid 61 degrees here in Florida, so I've got my long sleeve shirt on.
And I see John just sitting there raising his hand in the air.
Whatevs.
Yeah. And quite evidently, there's the third member of our crew with us today, Jon Parshall. How are you this fine December the 3rd, almost Pearl Harbor Day?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. In my distinctly colder Minnesota house. So,
Yes.
yeah.
It's nippy in South Mississippi today. It is when I say 37 degrees, it's actually about 42 right now, but good winter weather, good December weather. All right, so instead of doing my normal long drawn out, very windy introduction, I'm not going to do any of that today. We're going to do what we've done in the past, which is kind of do a riff on the commanders of the Pacific Theater 44, 45.
Yeah.
We're just going to start and just go for it, man. Take off.
Well, and I was going to say too, for the sake of our audience, it may not be apparent to people, but Seth in particular puts a ton of work into all of these episodes. So whenever we go into one of these things, Seth has typically cranked out 15, 16, 17 pages worth of notes and talking points, to which I will then add, additional stuff, and sometimes Bill too. But, not all of that. I don't think any of that is really kind of evident when we're doing these normal episodes. But for this one, we just get to sit down and either rag on people or praise people as we see.
Both.
Or both.
Or both.
Exactly.
Halsey. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're right, John. I don't do much research at all. The submarine episodes I'll do some, but it is pretty much all Seth, and we're so grateful to him. We don't say that enough, right?
Yeah.
If I do something, it's to subtract, not add. I make it worse, not better. So anyway.
So untrue.
Here we go.
So full of baloney.
Yeah.
So full of baloney. Well, don't worry, Bill. Your time's coming because the Indianapolis is coming up here soon, brother. And that's all you, my man.
Yes.
Well, see, that's not even fair, Seth, because I don't have to research that one. I got it all.
Yeah.
Right in the noggin. So
go ahead. It's all good. It's all good. All right. So as we've done in the past, we can dig into the weeds on some of these guys, but I think we should probably start up tip top. And I'm not saying necessarily Nimitz, because, the big thing with Nimitz in 44 and 45, of course, is Peleliu, which we all, are keenly aware of.
Yeah,
the issues there. We've kind of beat that to death. But one of the guys I think we need to talk about, and as Bill so snidely was like, Halsey, is William F. Halsey. And we've been talking about Bill Halsey for ever. I mean, since quite literally the very first episode. I believe we talked about him in the Pearl Harbor episode. And which, by the way, there's more Pearl Harbor stuff coming up in the future. We're gonna do the end all be all Pearl Harbor stuff. But so Halsey in 1944, he had, and 45, because we're kind of stretching into both here. He has his ups and his downs, and we know about his downs. So let's look at that first before we praise the man for what he does do later on. When we talked about Lady Golf, of which we did, I don't know, 4 or 5 Lady Golf.
Something.
Yeah, it was a bunch. And the big one, of course, that we rag on Halsey for was Cape Engano and oh, good gravy. Not Surigao Strait, Samar. Thank you. Samar, yeah, Samar. So what is your opinion? And we don't need to get too deep, but what is y'all's opinion on Halsey in 44? The thing, and keep in mind, and I always point this out because this is very, very true. When he takes command of Third Fleet, it's the first time he's had a sea command since 1942.
Yeah.
And a lot of things have changed, not just the fleet, but the tactics have changed. UNREP has changed. The war has changed. He's got new carriers he's never dealt with, new battleships, crews, whatever the hell. You name it. The fleet he takes over in 44 is nowhere near, with the exception of Enterprise and a handful of destroyers and battleships, the fleet that he knew in 42.
Yeah, and I'm not the first to say this, but I really think by the middle of 44, the war has just gotten too big and complex for Halsey to manage. This is just not his kind of a war anymore. I look back to his service in 42 as a theater commander, and I thought he was brilliant, just the right
Absolutely.
guy at the right place at the right time, and a good joint team player, could get along with the Army, could get along with Mac. But by 44, just the sheer mechanism of war making at this point is so enormously large and complex. And we've said it before that his staff has some problems in it as well.
Significant.
And you really got to lean on your staff if you're managing a war this big. And I feel like a lot of Halsey's problems are that his staff isn't good enough, and he, frankly, isn't a big picture enough thinker to really manage his fleet effectively anymore. It's too big.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, John. If I could put a little bit more of my spin on it, it's at some point when war scales up, when it becomes substantially more cerebral than it does at lower level tactical, operational, strategic. And Halsey was a master at the operational level, which was really what the Guadalcanal-Solomon's fight was all about.
Yeah.
When it became more strategic, that's when he started failing. And I'm going to be pretty provocative, intentionally provocative here by saying the things that he succeeded in 44 and 45 were, you're going to challenge me on some of this, and I'm happy that you will, are to a large extent successes of his staff. The things that his direct fingerprints are on almost all result in failure. Let me give you some examples. His provocative stance in 42 with his oration, right, his racist tirades that were meant to build up American vigor and support and confidence in the war. You might make a weak argument, but some argument that they were beneficial from a morale standpoint. By the time 43 and 44, 45 come by, he is absolutely negating our information campaign. And every word out of his mouth basically defeats a principle from the information, what we call today information war campaign, that we were trying to push forward. And his words were used against us collectively as Americans over and over and over again by the Japanese. His tactical operational decisions were bad. His decisions in the face of hurricanes were bad. And so really, I would say that, we sometimes compare him to Patton. No. Patton, John, you're the way more expert on this than I am. Almost everything Patton did operationally in the field was good and smart and successful. That was not true for Halsey, 44 and beyond. I'll shut up.
All right, so I'm going to push back on that just a smidge. So his operations at Leyte Gulf, as we know, he fudges them, shall we say, and that's putting it nicely.
Yep.
You're going to talk about Vietnam and all of South China Sea.
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Because hear me out. Because so in 44, again, we talked about this just a minute ago. He takes over a fleet that is 10 times the size of the fleet that he took over, that he had in 42. I mean, you got to remember the last time he's sailing with an American carrier task force is just before Midway. So it's May of 1942. I mean, think about the size of the fleet. So what he gets his hands on, this thing that is the Big Blue Fleet, exactly to your point, John, I think he's got so many toys. He's like, oh God, I don't know what to do. And he doesn't know what to do. He's like, he wants to play with everything at one time that you get under the Christmas tree. And it's like, no, dude, pick one. Oh, and by the way, you got this guy riding behind you, Mark Mitscher, who kind of knows what he's doing. Let him do his thing. Let him do his thing. And in Leyte Gulf, I mean, for all intents and purposes, he cuts Mitscher out of everything that not everything, but most everything that he does. And Mitscher, to the point, is sitting there. He's just sitting back like this. He's like, well, the hell with it. Let the boss do his thing. But
Yeah, I was just thinking too, with respect to Leite, it's ironic that here's a guy, Halsey, who is good at operating with the other services, and yet he's
Mhm.
not good at keeping Kincaid in the loop, who is essentially the Army's admiral, you know? And
right.
so,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of sad more than anything else. But
Mm.
But when Halsey takes over again and he goes into the South China Sea, exactly, Bill, like we were talking about, he has, I think, learned things. He's learned how to operate with the carrier task force that he has. Now McCain's running it because Mitscher is back, taking a well-deserved smoke break. McCain's running it now for the second go around, I believe. And Halsey now he's got all these ships and he's like, okay, I can actually take this huge freaking fleet and I can spread them out all over creation and we can go pound people into oblivion, not just in one spot, a la Cape and Gagno. I can
Mhm.
spread people out over the coast of Indochina and Formosa and all places in between for 450 miles, which is what he does when he goes through the South China Sea. And he goes in there and he keeps riding Nimitz's behind, like, please let me go, let me go, let me go, let me go, let me go. And then Nimitz, as we talked about, Bill's finally like, fine, go. And he goes in there with this express purposes to hunt down Japanese warships, which the intelligence he was given was bad. They weren't there.
yeah,
And then he
Mhm.
runs into all these tankers. His flyers run into all these tankers, and these guys go in there and just waylay these people.
waylay. Yeah,
And
Mhm.
and the effect that has on the war effort is tremendous. And Halsey immediately seizes on this, and he's like, "Oh, this is a good thing. Let's just keep going." And he keeps going until he's got to bug out. And that's just one example. When he goes to the home islands too in 45, he does good things. So I think exactly to your point, the war had passed him by 44, but he's a quick learner. He picks up on it because when he takes over again in 45, he does good things. The only thing that I think that Bill, you shot on him, and I would agree, is that he has a tendency to hit Formosa so many damn times that it
yeah.
becomes predictable. It
Well,
really
and
does.
I have some real misgivings over the utility of the raids against Kure as well.
Oh yeah, it was just to
Mhm.
finish it off kind of a thing.
Yeah, considering, what a flak trap that place had been turned into and the losses that we were, received as a result. Anyway, so I don't know if I had to give him a letter grade, I'm giving Halsey like a C minus, something like that.
If I was to give him a letter
Yeah.
grade for 44, I would agree with that. I'd give him a D. If I
Yeah.
combine 44 and 45, I'd give him maybe a C plus at best. But
Bill?
that's just me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm not so sure he learned as much as you're saying, but I will say that the South China Sea operation was successful, so he gets some credit for that. Yep,
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay. Let's do Nimitz quick.
All
A
right, go
minus.
for it.
Hell,
Yeah, Pellew, agreed.
that's the only
Yeah.
thing. And I think a lot of that was driven by the fact that he felt an obligation to MacArthur to carry ahead this operation. Um, and wasn't able to get in touch with him. And it goes to show you too just the enormous distances that are involved in this theater. That once the machinery
Mhm.
gets moving, it's really hard to call off the dogs. So that's the one kind of black eye I think he has for this entire time.
The one thing about Nimitz I will say too, and this is a good thing. This isn't well. I mean, I guess you could look at it from both sides of the fence. I think it's a good thing. Is that he really digs his heels in 45.
Yeah,
He realizes we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the kamikazes. He
yeah,
realizes that we're going to lose people, and yes, it is incredibly painful to lose people, and I don't want to lose anybody if I don't have to. But here's the deal: this is a war. We're going to lose people. We don't. At that time, they didn't know that the war was rapidly going to come to an end. And
yeah,
he
sure,
digs his heels in off the coast of Okinawa, and he makes that statement, and I don't have it in front of me because I have no notes about, yeah, we're losing destroyers, but we can build destroyers faster than they can build airplanes.
right.
Obviously, he's referring to the
Which is
Japanese
Mhm.
kamikazes, and he
Which is
digs
somewhat
his
amazing.
heels
hyperbolic,
into
but
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, the greatest admiral in American history, bar none,
Oh yeah.
for reasons that we haven't really spent much time talking about. While all of these operations are going on, he's queuing up the next one. And
right.
not just strategically, he's queuing up the logistics, the personnel, the the approvals back in Washington, which are non-trivial. Just managing King, making Roosevelt happy, placating MacArthur.
I was going to say playing nice with Mac.
A magician.
Agreed.
And we credit him for a lot of things we should credit him for. But there's a lot more we should be crediting him for that we haven't done many episodes on. Maybe we will in the future. But
I'm absolutely in agreement with that. He's the finest naval officer this country has ever produced, just hands down. So yeah.
So we talked about staff briefly, Halsey staff specifically, and there's two guys we got to point out. Three guys technically. We already kind of briefed on Mitscher, and we can get into Mitscher in a little bit more depth here in just a few minutes. One of them, is his reliance on staff. Halsey was faithful to a fault, loyal to a fault. Costco, and that's the guy I'm referring to, who drives he doesn't practically. He drives Halsey's fleet into a hurricane twice. And after the first one, he should have been fired. And Halsey, again, loyal to a fault, keeps the guy around and boomerangs back again. But another guy we need to talk about, we've only briefly mentioned, is McCain. It's John McCain. So McCain becomes, at least for a little while, Halsey's carrier man. And McCain comes in much like Bill Halsey does in 44, and he kind of fumbles the ball. He's not Mark Mitscher. He's not, Jocko Clark was not a huge fan of him. And again, Jocko Clark is another guy, but regardless, McCain is a guy that learns. He's an innovator. We talked about this when we talked about the Big Blue Blanket and the whole night carrier operations. That was McCain instituting that. McCain did that. Mitscher didn't do that. Mitscher picked it up after McCain was like, yeah, this really works. This works really well. So let's do this. McCain, I think, was more willing to listen than Mark Mitscher was. And McCain was probably the right guy to have under Bill Halsey, because whereas Halsey didn't necessarily listen, McCain did.
Where did we settle on his relief for cause, essentially, right? What did we think about that?
Well, he hung around to the end. I mean, he was there on the Missouri, and he goes home. When does he die? He dies like 2 days after he gets home, doesn't he?
Just a few days, a couple of weeks or something, right?
Something like that.
It's just he took a fall. So
somebody had to be put out to dry, and he was it, unfortunately.
It killed him. I mean, let's be honest here. It killed him. That and the 3-pack a day habit. But anyway.
So
all right. So
who you got?
Actually, I wanna yoink it away. Unless was there one more person you wanted?
No.
Go for it.
I want to talk about the other side of the ledger. I want to talk. Something about the Japanese. And I think there's a tendency in the study of this war to, from our standpoint as Americans, to sometimes look at the Japanese as being incompetent, and that these were militaries that just didn't know what they were doing. And broadly speaking, I would say that that's generally correct. But there were some luminaries in their roster, and so I would like to trot out what I call the 3 prophets of defense in depth, who were Colonel Nakagawa Kunio, the architect behind Peleliu, Kurabayashi Tadamichi, of course, at Iwo Jima, and Yahara Hiromichi at Okinawa. All 3 of these guys, I think, demonstrated that they were quality commanders that understood the nature of the war that they were presented with. They didn't necessarily like the nature of that war, but they adapted to it successfully, horrifically. In the case of both all 3 of those battles are just terrible. Just terrible for the U.S. They extract the absolute maximum casualties that they could have, except in the case of Yahara, of course, who was not listened to by his commander, Ushijima, and of course by Isamu Cho. So I would trot out all 3 of those guys, though, as being really high quality military officers who understood what they were doing.
agree 100%. And there's one guy, real-time history, and I always forget the dude's name.
Biak.
Yes. His name
Yeah.
is Kazumi Naoki.
Mm-hmm.
This dude was really one of the first.
He was really the first.
He
'Cause
really
he's
was
he's
of the
before
honeycomb
Pelican.
tactics.
Yeah.
Yeah. This cat is a believer in the honeycomb tactics, if you will. And when he gets the Americans trapped, which is essentially what they are on Biak, he digs up into those hills, into those cliffs and caves, and says, "Come on, come get me."
Right.
And he exacts a wicked toll. That's a battle people don't. We've done an episode on that, but that's a battle people don't really talk about. But that's really the first instance of, well, technically Tulagi is, but really this is the first instance of this type of tactic being planned for and executed to a degree to which it draws out huge amounts of American blood. So I agree 100%. Those dudes and him, those are the guys that they're the reason that the infantry casualties ratchet up skyward, in 44 and 45. Those are the guys.
And a lot of our PTSD casualties as well, certainly in places like Okinawa.
Yeah.
We mentioned that was the last great land victory, for a ground victory for the Japanese, was in 42 or 43.
Which one?
Ground victory?
Yeah, it was the Solomons, right? Or wasn't it?
Or you're talking about the naval battle. The last great naval battle was in 43 where they won, and I forget which one.
I'm talking about ground victory, battle.
I can't. Well, really, their biggest victories on the ground end up being, Operation Ichigo in China in 44. I mean, those are relatively.
Right.
But against us,
they
got nothing after.
They got nothing.
They got nothing after
right?
May of 42, really.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, when Burma goes down, that's really kind of it.
Right.
So,
if you want to look at it like this, if their goal was to exact casualties, knowing that they're going to die, if the goal is to exact casualties, Peleliu is a victory for the Japanese because they certainly do that. I mean, yes, they know they were going to lose that island, but go ahead, Bill.
The point I was making was that's when the strategy changed from some semblance of victory on the ground. We're superior to these Americans and we're going to defeat them, to a strategy of we're going to make this as painful as possible.
Well, the bellwether for that is the Marianas Campaign, because you look at and I was actually I was going to now having praised our 3 or 4 Japanese generals, I now wanted to go to the other side and talk about.
But before you do that, the point I'm making is those guys were brilliant at that losing strategy.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault. It's not their fault. But, they did as well as anybody could do in those circumstances. That's kind of the point. Now you can go on to the Marianas, John. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that you're right, though, that one of the things that makes 1942 so interesting to me as a year of study is looking at this transition between the tactics that worked gloriously for the Japanese in places like Malaya, the Philippines, and Burma. They try those same tactics against the Marines and also against the Australians in in Guadalcanal and New Guinea, and they fall on their faces. Why? And there's a multivariate answer as to why, and I'm not going to get into that now.
That is fascinating.
It is. It's really, really interesting. But then, the Japanese maintain this kind of offensive mindset all the way through 1943 and really up until the middle of 1944, when, General Saito is determined that he's going to try to, kick the Americans back in, water's edge defense. We're going to defeat them with counterattacks. We're going to destroy their invading force. And so he is the first of what I would trot out as my 3 prophets of performative stupidity. And those are Saito Yoshitsugu, who's the commander on Saipan, Cho Isamu, who is Ushijima's chief of staff on Okinawa, and then Admiral Toyota Soemu, who sends the Yamato on this ridiculous, stupid, doomed mission down to Okinawa at the beginning of that campaign. All 3 of these guys needed their heads examined. They're all idiots. And they they conformed to certain Japanese military societal pressures, looking at the militaries as a society within themselves that produced absolutely no results of any consequence. But yeah, Saito, I think, is, the first of those, obviously, because his battle plan for Saipan is just disastrous. And yet he ends up that campaign by ordering this all-out bonsai attack and then doesn't care to lead it himself. I have nothing but contempt for the man. And the same for Cho Isamu, who just runs a terrible campaign on Okinawa and throws away the opportunity to extract even more casualties against the Americans than he could have.
I would insert one more guy into that your triumvirate of stupidity, and that's Count Torochi Hisaichi at Leyte.
Yeah,
He's the overall commander. He's above Yamashita, and we'll talk about Yamashita in a bit. But
right.
he's the overall commander above Yamashita, and he's the guy that puts the kibosh on Yamashita's plans to, like, hey, look, let's leave everybody in Lausanne and let's just fight the delaying battle, bleed them white fight on Lausanne. Tarachi's the guy that says, no, we're going to throw everybody on Leyte. We're going to hold Leyte. Come hell or high water, we're going to hold Leyte. And then Leyte turns into a mini Guadalcanal for the Japanese for multiple reasons.
They lose a lot of ships, including my favorite destroyer,
people,
Shimakaze. Yeah, right.
I mean, just the amount of folks that they lose over there because he is insistent on holding Leyte, to which is stupid, because even once we get over there, and we'll talk about MacArthur in a bit too, but once we get over there, we're like, oh yeah, this place sucks. I mean, it takes months to get weeks to get the airfields into operation, and it's a mess. It's a mess, and those people could have been used on Lausanne, which is where they were taken from, by the way, to put on Leyte, and the fight for Lausanne could have lasted even longer than it did. I mean, I'm grateful that it didn't, but I'm just saying, if you want to throw somebody else
sub-optimizing your military strategies.
Boom.
Yeah. Terauchi. Yeah, that's how you pronounce his name. But
he's a fool.
He's a fool. Well, and actually, and while we're in the Philippines, I'm just going to jump to the bottom of my list, to a guy that I know we talked about extensively when James Scott was on, Admiral Iwabuchi Sanji.
Oh.
I mean, he is the winner of my Imperial Japanese Army Dick Bag of the Year award for 45. Here's a guy who just betrays, the orders of his superior officer, and then on his own nickel decides to stick around and commit a mini rape of Nanjing, leading to the needless deaths of 100,000 Filipino civilians. I mean, he's the kind of guy that you'd want to hang and then dig up again and hang him again just to make sure. What a chode. What a horrible, horrible human being.
Yeah.
His body was never identified, but if it had been, he's the kind of cat that you would want to take a trip to Manila just to spit on his grave. Anyway, so that's him.
That's Willis Lee's biggest failing, and off the shores of Guadalcanal, is that he didn't eviscerate Kirishima, to
kill him on the bridge.
Yeah. Throw a 16-inch 45 right through his face.
Yeah, that would have worked.
Yes, I'm doing real-time history, which is dangerous here, guys. And there were 5 generals that were executed after the war.
Yeah.
Kenji Doihara, Koiki Hirota, Saishiro Itagaki, Haitaro Kimura, and Ikura Muto. Of course, that's the top 6, right? And we're technically not commanding generals. But
they kill, of course, they execute Hama and Yamashita too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
is there any correlation, though, between the list that you performed, that you described as the idiots list, and these guys
good point. Well, Muto was the cat behind come on, John, Imphal in Burma and India. He was that guy was just a truly an idiot. Or maybe that was Mutaguchi. Actually, I'm spacing here. Anyway, no, I didn't do my homework well enough to walk in.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean to. This wasn't supposed to be. I didn't intend Stump the Chump. It was just
yeah.
Things
Pop quiz.
Well, Yamashita, I mean, that's a good. you bring in, you brought up Yamashita, and his execution at the end of the war at the hands of Douglas MacArthur, who was very adamant. He's like, nope, we're going to hang this son of a bitch right now.
Yeah.
And that was Mac. And again, we'll talk about Mac in a minute. You'll be surprised. I got a lot of good things to say about MacArthur. But point being, Yamashita is the fall guy for Iwabuchi's antics.
Yep.
And to a point, Yamashita, we always say the buck stops here,
Right.
But, Yamashita, I don't want to say allowed that to happen, because by the time that really goes down in Manila,
How does
they're
he prevent
cut
it?
off.
It's in northern Luzon. I
Right.
can't physically
Right.
drive down there and say, yo, get you up to
Exactly.
the hills. I can't, but yeah, what it demonstrates is, once again, this sort of deep-seated rogue element built into the Imperial Army that you had, well, and in the Navy here too, that you had
Sure.
this belief that junior officers could just do stuff like this and it was cool.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with
Mitscher was executed for atrocities in the Philippines.
Okay, fair.
So Iwabuchi, it's before Yamashita ever gives the order to get out. He's like, we ain't going nowhere. We're going to stay right here. And of course, he was in charge of the docks and everything. That was his legitimate job. But when he gets the order, they'd already been preparing inner street defenses, house to house defenses,
right,
for weeks before he ever, because he never intended to go. So he basically gave the middle finger to Yamashita and said, I'm staying here, brother. Come get me if you want to, but we're gonna make these people pay. It's complete jackass.
Yeah.
Complete jackass.
Okay.
Let's talk about MacArthur. We got it. We got to talk about Doug. And we have eviscerated Douglas MacArthur throughout this series, especially in 42 and into 43, and for the most part with good reason. However, I say this before, when we had John McManus on multiple times talking about land campaign in the Philippines, I said it then and I stand by my statement. Find me something wrong, with the exception of not allowing Eichelberger to run the Luzon offensive that MacArthur does in the Philippines in 1944-45.
No, I too am not a huge fan of the man, but I do think that by this time in the war, he has learned a lot and he knows what he's doing at this point. So, yeah, I got
agree.
And again, fast forward to his overlordship of Japan post-war. I think it was
masterful,
pretty enlightened. Yeah,
it really was.
Yeah. So I know. It just pains me though, doesn't it?
It does.
Kind
of makes the skin crawl a little bit.
I know.
It's true. You got to give props.
Got to give props. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The only thing I've been disappointed with in our comments section on MacArthur is the people that defended his bringing a 16-year-old to a DC as his consort, because it wasn't technically statutory rape, because the age of assent was 16. Give me a frickin' break, folks. He was 50. Okay. I don't want to, I don't delete the comments, but I don't reply to them either.
Yeah.
But militarily, Philippines, he did well. We're all in agreement on that. And I've even seen somebody criticize the fact that we said good things about him in the occupation. I can't remember what point they were making, but didn't go. Oh, it had to do something with the emperor, right? We gave the emperor too much reign, to use the cowboy expression.
Well, yeah. Sorry, I'm multitasking here.
That's okay. I think with Mac, when it comes to overall, the man was a petulant child. And he was. He really was. He was a petulant child. He was a crybaby. I want more. And when he finally gets more, and he does, he has this next to Eisenhower, he has the biggest United States Army field command of the friggin' war.
Right.
And once he gets his way and he gets into the Philippines, which I still stand by my statement that was the right thing to do. Once he gets into the Philippines, he's a different dude. Like he is
Mhm.
literally, it's like somebody flips on or off, whatever the case may be, a switch, and he's a different guy, and he makes really good tactical command decisions, and he allows his people to do what they need to do without sticking his finger in it too much. And frankly, that's his only fault, is that he didn't stick his finger in it and get Krueger moving, because that
That's
Yeah.
episode in Manila
I
may
see.
not have happened.
Go, John, you go first.
Okay, well, I actually, now that I think about it, I am gonna stick a finger in his eye for something about his Japanese administration, which is technically outside the scope of our discussion. But one of the biggest problems that we have in the post-war world is that Japan is still coming to grips with its role in the war.
Yes.
And part of
Yes.
that, I think, is driven by the fact that we never rubbed Japan's nose in what they had done the same way we did with Germany, and that is Mac's fault. And it
That is true.
starts with his rehabilitation of Hirohito. I have always been of the opinion that yes, Hirohito served a useful role in the transition to full occupation, but once you get to the spring of 1946, where we have fed Japan throughout the winter, and Mac has staved off starvation in those islands, and it is clear that Japan is completely under the boot, and happily so. Now I think the time has come to say politely, we have a perfectly serviceable crown prince that I can put on the throne, and I'm so sorry, Hirohito, but it is time for you to be hung
Mhm.
for your part in the war. You were never the string puller, but you were the spider at the middle of the web, and you were perfectly informed of the things that your military was doing.
Absolutely.
Later
Yep.
for you.
Yep.
And I think that that could have gone a long way towards just making the Japanese people come to terms with what had happened here and bring them out of this mode, which I'm sorry, still persists to this day, of them
It
looking at the
does.
war as something that happened to them rather than something
Right.
that they were actively complicit in and participated in
And
Mm.
began, by the
and
way.
began.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my biggest ding on Mac.
We have a frequent Japanese commentator, a viewer, right? I won't call him a fan. It's going to be interesting to see how he responds to this, because you are 100% correct. Anybody who spent any time in Japan at all knows they continue to pretend. And by the way, this is baked into their educational system. It's
Yes,
not happenstance. They continue to pretend that they were one of many victims of that war. And the
right.
Japanese population, by and large, were victims, but the Japanese government was not. They
Correct.
initiated this.
Well, the
And so,
Japanese citizenry were victims of their own government, and just
correct,
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've lived in Japan. I have a lot of Japanese friends. I love going over
Mm,
there. They're great people. But the bottom line is that wartime Japan brought upon themselves every ounce of the destruction that was meted out on their cities and on their population. And even with all of that destruction, they still like paid, 1 for 5 or 6 or 7 in comparison to the victims that they, inflicted on the rest of Asia. And the rest of Asia has never
and that
forgotten.
Philippines, yeah,
Absolutely.
Malay,
China. Oh my God.
China, yeah,
15 to 20 million killed in China alone. So anyway,
right.
and that's,
Hey,
yeah, some of
Seth,
that's MacBall.
yeah, thank you. Seth, going back to your thing about why Max, what the switch that flipped, right? I think, in my opinion, there is such a switch. And here's the switch. Mac loved two things.
himself.
Number one, he loved Mac, right? Mac über alles, right? So there's Mac, and then there's the rest of the world. The second thing he loves is the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody
Yes.
can argue, one could make a cogent argument that he loved the Philippines more than he loved America, despite his West Point speech,
Yeah.
which we have lionized Canada.
I think
but
you're
we're not going to go
100%
that
right.
far enough.
No, I think you're right, man. I think you're 100% right, and I'm glad you said
So
that. Go ahead, keep
the
going.
switch he flipped was once he got into the Philippines, he seconded him. He made himself secondary to the mission of liberation of that thing that he loved.
Agreed.
Once that thing was liberated, he
Reverted.
unflipped the switch,
Reverted
and
to
he's back
dick-hooding.
to loving Mac more than everything. Go ahead.
No, I think you're 100%
I think
right,
that's
because
brilliant.
we've
Yeah.
made that point before, in that everything, and I do mean every single thing he does from 1942 until he puts a boot on Lete's shore builds up to that moment. That's all he cared about, to the point where he pushed for and, whined and cried and threw hissy fits and, and made decisions pre-October 44 that were contrary to the actual war effort and goals of the United States of America, because
That's right.
he wanted to get to the Philippines more than anything else. And once he gets there, it's like, okay, now I can do what I want to do. And he does it very, very well. But exactly, you're 100% right. I would agree with you that there were times, and people are going to say he loved America. Sure, he did. Of course he did. But
yeah, he did.
He loved the Philippines more. I would wager. I really would.
Yeah,
he considered it his home. It was his home.
Not just his home, his fiefdom. I'm sorry to say it that way, but it is, until Japan became his fiefdom.
Right.
And then, but he needed this fiefdom, right? And so, yeah, I mean, Roosevelt was trying to keep him away from running for president against him. And so he's placating. What the heck kind of general who loves America, right, would do those kinds of things? But I'll stop.
He's comics.
Who's next on your list, John? Who you got next on your list?
Okay, I'm going to take a real dive into a sleeper here. And I just want to do a shout out to a guy that gets no credit, hardly any. And let's go back to Peleliu. Peleliu, of course, is consistently portrayed as a fight that the Marines did. But the truth of the matter is that at the end of the day, it was the Army that captured that island. And am I maybe pushing the point? There were still Marines there, but First Martiv had been wrecked. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They pulled the first Marines out because they were wrecked. So I want to do my shout out, and John McManus will like this, to Major General Paul Mueller, who's the commander
81st.
of the 81st Infantry Division. And, what a sterling job to actually bring that campaign to conclusion with a lower body count, I hate to say it, than the Marines got. One of the things on Peleliu that I find it was just stunning. The first and only time I've seen it, there's this little rickety stairway that goes to the top of Five Sisters. And we don't take our guests up there because it's super dangerous and not an OSHA compatible staircase. And I mean, it is steep. You get to the top of this hill and you are sitting above the clouds almost, and Wildcat Bowl and Death Valley are on either side of you, and it's just precipitous. And at the very top of that thing is this obelisk from one of the infantry regiments from the 81st. I can't remember, the 225th, or I don't know. It's basically this huge stone middle finger sitting up there on top of Five Sisters, basically saying, we took this mother humping hill. And, it's really something to see. And I feel like the Army's contributions in that battle often get overshadowed. And so here's my, my virtual sync pack to Paul Mueller.
They wiped out. They came up with some pretty ingenious ways of eliminating those caves too. And God love the Marine Corps, and God love the First Marine Division. But they were, exactly to your point, they were done. They were smoked. They were out.
Absolutely.
And when the Army comes in there, they start bringing their combat engineers up. Not that the Marines didn't, but the Army, like, these guys are fresh. They bring their combat engineers up to the top of these hills, or as close as they can. And these are the same dudes who ran like pipes from offshore ships and started pumping napalm and diesel fuel via fire hose down in there and throwing Willie Pete. Boom.
Boom.
And I mean,
now what?
Yeah, Barbecue City. And that was very crass, and I apologize for that, but it's the truth. That's what they did.
And you can still see those smoke stains on the caves today when you go back. I'll just say right here to anybody who is listening, if you ever want to go see a cool battlefield in the Pacific, Peleliu is it. It is a time capsule. It's amazing. You know, you'll be walking along and it's just artifacts and it's crazy. Anyway, pray continue.
No, it's just, it brings to mind, though, a guy that we aren't talking about in 44 and 45 for good reason, and that is Holland Smith.
He's on my list.
Is he?
Yeah.
What would have happened at Peleliu, right?
Right.
So before we move on to H.M. Smith, and we will get to him in a second, we're talking about Army divisional commanders. Got to talk about Andrew D. Bruce.
Andrew D. Bruce.
Bad man. That dude was with it in so many ways. First of all, he had trained 77th ID to the nth degree, and he had trained them for every conceivable operation that they could ever possibly run into before they ever get to they're in the Pacific, but before they ever get to the combat area. I mean, trained them for everything, so much so that Admiral Chester W. Nimitz said without hesitation that the 77th Infantry Division was the finest Army division under his command at any time during the war.
Yeah.
And Andrew D. Bruce was the finest United States Army general he ever had the pleasure to work with. And that's very high praise. Yeah. And I mean, you're talking, with the likes of, all kinds of folks that he always consistently, and including Marine generals, ranked A.D. Bruce way up there, top 2, 3, 4 of his finest field commanders ever. And that guy was awesome. His people loved him. And Bill, you and I have talked about this a million times. If you got people underneath you who think that you walk on water, that's a good sign. And they loved Bruce.
So did Nimitz have a picture of Bruce under the glass on his desk?
I don't think so.
Oh, no, that wasn't him. Go ahead. Never mind.
I don't think so.
That was Mac.
but Bruce was amazing. I mean, he was aggressive, but he wasn't foolhardy. He wasn't reckless, and that's the key. He was aggressive and he pushed. I mean, Leyte, that whole swing around through Ormoc when he puts his people up in there, he is one of those fire eaters that really gets that operation going. He gets down and into Okinawa, and he does the very similar thing there. Of course, they run into a different type of animal down there, but still, he's an incredible field commander who coaches one of the finest divisions in the Pacific period.
You like him better than Eichelberger?
No, but he's close.
I like Eichelberger a lot too.
Yeah. Bob Eichelberger is he is my favorite United States Army general of the entire war, both theaters, because the guy comes in and he's a rescue operator. He's a firefighter. He never, poor dude, never seemingly gets put in there when the chips are good. He always gets put in there when the chips are down. And he consistently pulls it out.
Delivers.
Every time. Every time. Bunagona. And he kind of fumbles initially at first. But again, he learns.
He learned right now. It was clear within a day that he was like, okay, different animal here. How are we gonna turn this around? And physically brave, always up at the front. Him and all of his staff officers too. I mean, he brings a crew with him, and he makes sure that those guys are always leading from the front and demonstrating, how to hold this. To a fault.
When Biak go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to say he also learned that upstaging MacArthur is almost as dangerous as the Japanese. But to go ahead.
Indeed, but when Biak goes sideways, Mac says, get Bob's ass down there now. Yeah, and Eichelberger, he'd already figured that this was going to happen because he's been listening to the messages. He knew that he's like, all right, here we go. He goes down there. He's not there for, I don't know, a few hours or so, and he gets in a Jeep and he wants to go see the situation for himself, because that's what good field commanders generally do. He goes down there and he can't see down into this valley, so the fool climbs a tree and falls out the damn tree. Yeah, really? He falls out the damn tree, and all of his staff are like, oh my God, because he's like starts to roll down the damn hill, and the Japanese are below him, and he's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, get your ass up here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And they're like, get in the damn Jeep, dude. So, but I mean, he, and he gets overshadowed, unfortunately, by Krueger in the Philippines because of the fact that, he takes he takes the other end of the Manila race, and he's got 11th Airborne and those people up in there, and they're making that literally that run into Manila where he comes in second, to Kruger's army, and then he gets shuffled off to finish off the rest of the Philippines, and that whole campaign is something we haven't even explored that we need to, is Eighth Army's campaign in the Philippines after Luzon, because I mean that is a tremendous amount of fighting, and Eichelberger is given free rein. It's just like, Bob, you go do your thing, and he does. He just kicks ass all day long.
Yeah.
So Seth, I can't help this, but I got to say this: you and I were speaking about Eichelberger one day. It was about a year ago, and I walk into this antique store in Fredericksburg, Virginia, not Texas, where my daughter lives, Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I see Eichelberger's autobiography, first edition, on the shelf. It's like, does anybody know what this thing is? And so I pull it off, paid $2 for it. And I think I had to text you a photograph of it to show you.
You did. I was like, you better buy that book.
Yeah, I got to buy that book, right?
Yeah. Anyway, who's next on the list?
So we've talked around this guy, but we haven't directly addressed him. Raymond Spruance. Solid, more than solid. Nimitz's best operator, I think. He just gets it, and not the life of the party, obviously, but understands the mechanics of this war. Has a great staff. Never loses a battle. I mean, always comes. Not that we were going to lose something like the Marianas, but I really admire Spruance's ability to keep his eye on the strategic ball and understand that, yeah, I'd like to fight a carrier battle if I can, but assuring the success of this overall mission is what I'm here to do. And he has no need for glory whatsoever, and so is able to consistently keep calm and make rational decisions, to the ire of guys like Jocko Clark. I get it, but I just can't say enough good things about Spruance, and I can't think of anything that he really bobbles in the later part of the war. Am I wrong?
Nothing huge.
Chasing ships to try to get in surface battles, maybe.
Okay. Thank you. Good point.
But his grandkids are friends of mine, and they watch this podcast, and so I'm not gonna. But that's why I threw that in there, because I don't want to make it look like I'm just sucking up to them. What I said earlier about when the war grows to a certain level, it becomes very cerebral.
Yeah,
and Spruance is able to manage that.
Absolutely,
Halsey is not. What the two share is neither. Both of them lack any semblance of guile. Right? There's no guile in them. They are what they are. And Spruance, the dry, cerebral thinker; Halsey, the very boisterous, emotional, right? Very opposite.
Kick him in the teeth kind of a guy.
Yeah,
exactly. Very opposite in some ways, but similar in mission above self in both cases. MacArthur, sorry. So I got nothing bad to say about him other than his little penchant he has for chasing these measly surface ships just to,
gun them down.
Blood on the claws kind of thing. Go ahead.
That was foolishness. Yeah, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. We're talking about taking Iowa and New Jersey and
off a truck,
chasing those guys. That was stupid. And then he kind of does the same thing after Yamato, and you've got Mitscher's. You got the most powerful naval force in the world over here. Let's go send these battleships. Why? Why? That was foolishness. But aside from that, you can't really find anything that the dude did wrong. He got kind of he kind of got dealt a bad hand when he raided the home islands. That was not his fault. That was weather. He had he and Mitscher had these huge intentions to go in there and just sweep the Kanto plane clean. But he can't hit him if you can't see him, and of course things go south after that with Franklin. But I mean, again, that's out of your control, and that's the chances you take. But no, I mean, it's hard to pick something wrong or something that Spruance did wrong.
All right. I'm going to say for another quality commander, Ozawa Jisaburo.
Mm-hmm.
Quality commander, and the only admiral, Japanese admiral at Leyte that actually completed his mission, performed it as specified, and yet was contemplating committing suicide over the erasure of his force during the course of that activity. Not that he had any real control over that when you don't have any aircraft. But yeah, I really like that guy. I think he too, a very cerebral cat, also appreciated by his men, not a yeller, more of a teacher. And I think a quality commander. And I often wonder what would have happened at places like Midway if it had been Ozawa who had been in charge of the carrier force and not Nagumo.
I was going to ask you, wasn't he theoretically next up, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, the only reason that Kitabutai was under the command of Nagumo was because by reason of strict seniority, Nagumo was slightly ahead of Ozawa in the pecking order. And you just, again, dear Christ, just couldn't you be a little more flexible about things and put a guy in charge who was a clear aviation advocate from the get-go and understood this weapon systems? But no, you sort of flip it over to the Americans being willing to reach down the batting order. Chester Nimitz. I mean, how many admirals were senior to him when he gets, plucked?
40,
Yes,
like that,
it's ridiculous, But you're the right guy, I think. So put you in anyway.
But that same that seniority malarkey, it still holds true with the United States too. I mean, you look, Callahan and Norman Scott and that kind of thing.
Good point. Great.
That kind of, and there's other examples of that too, for that matter. There's other examples of that too, but that's the one that comes off top of mind, and that's that kind of thing that
Although I
continue
to maintain that, but I don't think that Scott would have won that battle, and Callahan did. Callahan, we don't know what Callahan's plan is. We can only infer, and it looked to be suicidal. But it was I've made this argument before that only a suicidal approach to that battle is going to pay dividends. If you try to fight a medium range engagement, which Norman Scott might well have wanted to fight, we lose. It's just, I think it's absolutely clear. So anyway,
getting back to the seniority point, though, all I was going to say is it was only FDR who was willing to override it, right? The reason Scott and Callahan issue came up down there is because FDR wasn't selecting the commander, the overall. The Navy fell in line. They complied.
Yeah. It was Turner who put them in charge. So,
who we got next?
Well, I'd lose my submarine credentials if I didn't throw Lockwood into this conversation. Right?
Okay, go.
No, and there's not much to say because it was done so quietly, the silent service, and efficiently. But throughout 44 and 45, the submarines were just doing what the submarines did. And with some fanfare occasionally, but not a lot, right? Not a lot. I mean, Tang goes down, things like that happen. We're losing boats. We lost 52. Have I said that today yet? No, we didn't. I didn't. Right? We're losing submarines, and but we're undeterred. I mean, we're still sending them into very dangerous places. Guys, the COs are willing to do it. We've stopped having to fire incompetent, overcautious COs. We're learning. We've fixed the torpedo problem.
He fixed the torpedo problem.
I was going to say it was because of him.
He fixed the torpedo. Yep.
Yeah.
And he's training crews. When we lose people like, just fill in the blank, Mush Morton, he's taking it personal. He's a caring, loving commander, very great tactical mind, great operational mind, not afraid to sacrifice submarines to get the mission done, and sacrificed 52 of them. So there you go, Lockwood.
Lockwood is somebody that definitely needs to be mentioned because and when Robert English is killed, who's the original
That thing.
sub pack.
Yeah.
Things, and again, he wasn't a bad commander. I think he was a little less in touch with his skippers and his underlings than Lockwood was. Uncle Charlie. I mean, that's why they called him Uncle Charlie, for crying out loud. And by they, I mean, the fleet. But, Lockwood comes in there and he takes it, just like you said, Bill, he takes it personal, which can be good and bad. But to his credit, it was good, because exactly to your point, he wasn't afraid to relieve people who were not getting the job done. He was a fighter. And by that, I'm not talking about going up there and piloting, running the submarine himself. He fought for his people. He fought for new weapons. He's the guy that went to Buord and was like, this stuff sucks. Give me things that work. And it wasn't just him, but he was the main voice. He's the reason mainly that got fixed. The torpedoes, of course. And I mean, his execution, deployment, and just the way he ran the subforce in the Pacific, especially in 44, and by 45, there wasn't hardly anything to sink, because he was so good.
Yeah, just a mincing machine. Yeah. Our subforce was terrifying.
Yeah, Lockwood was amazing.
Yeah, I would say that, though, that I agree that English wasn't a bad admiral, but I don't think the torpedo problem would have been solved anywhere. Probably would taken at least a year longer if he
just inconceivable. If you think about it, it's just
stupid. It's stupid that they didn't just say, yeah, you know what? I'm going to take the word of the guys that are actually going out there and doing the thing.
Right.
I'm going to say, no, you guys suck, man. Mark torpedoes are great.
Well, really? So good on Lockwood then for actually coming in with empirical data and saying, look, this is reproducible. Go fix the bugs. No, it's not just my word versus your word. Anyway,
I don't think I've ever said this, shockingly, because I don't think there's anything I've never said. But here's one thing. This is one of the many things that are different about submarines. In surface warfare, you've got an admiral with the fleet on the ships. In aviation warfare, naval aviation, you've got an admiral with the carriers on the ships, talking to the pilots as they land, sometimes even flying the missions. In submarine warfare, you don't have any of that.
Right.
So the lieutenant commander CO, later commander CO, still today commander CO, by the way, those guys, they're the senior dudes to lay eyes on.
Yeah.
And if you're not believing them, it's not going to get changed. And this is why it's so important. And frankly, when I was Commodore, I had 6 submarines in my squadron. There were admirals senior to me who had never conducted a mission like the ones I had conducted in command, and did not understand how to train for it, how to prepare for it. And they were just flat out wrong on some issues. And did I get in some fights with some of these admirals? If you know me enough by now, you know that I did. Was it conducive to my career? Probably not. But the point is that was happening in World War II as well. And dudes were going to battle over these torpedo issues. But until you get an admiral who says, you know what, I may not have actually conducted one of these missions. Maybe I ought to listen to these guys. Right?
Yeah.
And because this was happening when I was CO, when I was Commodore, it still happens today, I suspect. And that's a big difference, though, between submarines and the other communities in the Navy.
Yeah.
Smaller house, man. Smaller house.
Yeah. So I want to slag on some people now. Let's right.
Let's get to the dirty
ready.
stuff.
Yeah. William Rupertus, commander of 1st Mardu at Peleliu. Boy, that was a bad performance.
Oh. So, yes, agree, 150,000%. The guy takes over from a legend. He takes over from Vandergrift.
Right.
He leads the division on Cape Gloucester. He does okay. The division does, as good as they can in that terrible environment.
Miserable. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, he's with them on Pavuvu, and I mean, they're not doing anything there aside from fighting rats and land crabs. But then when he gets his big shot on Peleliu, he's very Holland Smith-esque.
Yeah.
To a lesser degree, because he's not, a corps commander. He's a divisional commander, but you could hold Rupertus's feet on the fire for the destruction of the First Marine Division.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that you could have had 81st Inf in there a lot sooner than you did, but you were just bound and determined that we're going to take care of this place. We're Marines and blah blah blah. It was just boneheaded.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the codicil to that. I hate to say it, is Chesty Puller. A tremendous Marine, a great fighter, terrible performance on Peleliu, wrecked his regiment to no purpose. And he was sick, he was injured, he was just obviously not the same man that he normally had been. But god damn, what an awful performance, and so sad to see that regiment just get wrecked.
Well, you can
Guadalcanal ruin him.
Yeah.
Did Guadalcanal ruin him? Was that what did it?
I think to some degree, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
That's where he got hit. That's where he got that wound.
Right.
Really festered. And yeah, Dave Holland Dave will push back and say, that was part of the reason, and very well may have been. But as a divisional commander, Rupertus should have seen this. He should have seen the body count coming in from First Marines and said, something ain't right here.
Right. Yeah.
To the point where, good Lord, I'm spacing. Geiger, he comes ashore and is like,
dude,
something's not right with this cat here, man.
Yeah. Clearly said.
Yeah.
You can see it in the Marine histories that, the Corps commander quickly ascertained that this is unlikely to occur given the current state of the regimental commander. He just calls it right out.
And he was loved when he was in charge. When he was with 7th Marines on Guadalcanal, they thought again that the man walked on water.
Yeah.
And then when he gets 1st Marines, I knew a lot of guys in H Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st, and G Company, and K31. They hated Chesty Puller with a passion.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
They detested him because of the fact that he bled their regiment white.
He was a butcher. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's too bad. Which then allows us then to swing over to a really quality dude, Roy Geiger.
Yep.
Just aces for that guy all the way through the war too. I mean, he starts off really strong at Guadalcanal, and such an enlightened performance in the Marianas campaign. The contrast between what happens on Saipan with Smith versus Smith and what happens on Guam with, Geiger in charge of that show, and how well they get along with the Army. Of course, A.D. Bruce is there with the 77th ID, but Geiger is just one of these guys who just gets it and can operate with the Army and gets along with everybody, and a really quality commander, I think.
And John McManus had posed the question, I don't know if it's a question or more of a statement, but he had said, what would have happened if Geiger was Corps commander on Saipan?
Right.
Obviously, we win. We still win. We all know that.
Still win.
Would the 27th Division have been cut to ribbons like they were? Would Ralph Smith have been hung out to dry? And I mean, to a point, Ralph Smith should have been relieved, but still, the kerfluffle of Holland Smith and all the
I see
showing,
You're right. I see Geiger going in and being collaborative with Smith to start with. And part of the problem with 27th ID, of course, is that they've been ripped in two and told, one group, you've got to go down here and deal with this group of holdouts down at the bottom of the island, and we're going to put the other regiments and send them up Death Valley. I mean, the whole thing was just bollocksed from a tactical standpoint. And I just can't
put that on Holland Smith too.
Absolutely, who never bothered to visit the front, and that would not have been the case with Geiger. So,
because to your point on Peleliu, who goes to see Chesty Puller on the front lines? Roy Geiger.
Roy Geiger. Yeah. So,
okay, anyway. Let's see. Who else can we dish?
We haven't talked at all about the Army Air Corps, and we really need to, because Curtis LeMay is hugely important to the outcome of this war. And, again, not necessarily the guy that you want to invite to your cocktail parties, but what an operator, what a
Yeah.
tactical innovator, what a man who was willing to take radical steps and take all the responsibility on his own shoulders when he switches tactics, for the firebombing. I mean, that is all Curtis LeMay, and he is willing to be the fall guy if there's fallout back at home. He knows he's going to take the bullet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got nothing but good things to say about Curtis LeMay.
100%, John. There's no way he didn't discuss his change in tactics with leadership. But there's a difference. He didn't ask permission.
That's the
Right.
key.
He might have discussed it, but he didn't. He gave everybody above him deniability
Right.
if it went south. We've said this before. He said, if we lose this war, I'm going to be tried as a war criminal. He knew it.
Yeah.
And he wasn't wrong. But he also was pretty sure we weren't going to lose the war at that point. So kind of an easier thing to do. And his tactics were brutal.
But they were necessary.
I go back and forth as to whether they were, absolutely necessary, particularly as it pertains to the Tokyo firebombing. Some of it, yes, some of it, no. There's a mixture in there. He's not 100% pure, nor is anybody in this war.
Yeah.
So, but he was effective, and I agree with that 100%.
My thing with Kurt LeMay is that, and exactly to your point, did he discuss this with leadership? The changing tactics. I'd say yes, because there were test raids done before Meeting House. Low-level fire raids done before Meeting House. So there was a known thing that's like, this will probably work, if we do it like this. But exactly to both of your points, he took the bull by the horns and said, all right, this is what we're going to do. And he informed, can't think of the general's name. Good God.
Hap?
No, underneath Hap. Norstad, Lawrence Norstad.
Oh,
He tells
okay.
Norstad, he says, look, this is what we're going to do. And I'm not asking permission. We're going to do this. And if it fails, it's my fault. And if it succeeds, I don't want to talk about it. Let's just keep on rocking and rolling. And that's exactly what he does. But, I think that the tactic change was necessary for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that the high altitude bombing campaign was failing.
Yeah.
There was no success. I mean, very, very small, not enough to warrant the casualties.
No.
Not enough to warrant the expenditure in money and material. You weren't getting it done.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you can only be as moral in this war as your bombing technology will allow you to be. And the jet stream over Japan ruined that. I kind of look at Haywood Hansell as kind of a tragic figure. I mean, I admire the man's moral rectitude and that he wanted to limit Japanese casualties as much as possible. And so he tries bringing in, tried and true 8th Air Force doctrine into Japan, and it just won't get it done. And even that, I mean, we Americans, I think, sort of hang our hats on precision daylight bombing without understanding in many cases that, 8th and 15th Air Forces were doing a lot of radar blind bombing, and we definitely had chalk on our toes from playing pretty close to the foul line. We were not intentionally burning down cities the way Arthur Harris was, but, we were killing plenty of civilians in the process. But yes, Tokyo represents us making that final step down the rung of the ladder, I guess. But just got to get her done.
I would say, when it comes to the 8th Air Force, and obviously that's not what we're here to talk about. We most certainly did dip our fingers in there. We're going to kill everybody here, party. And we just had the ability with the technology in the B-29, the M69 in particular, the cluster firebomb, whatever you want to call it, and the right conditions and the right commander in Curtis LeMay to get that done and execute what we had already been talking about for months, years, to some degree, in Europe, and putting that to play in the Pacific. And that's, so I mean, 8th Air Force isn't clean by any means.
Yeah, before we get off him, I want to say one more good thing and one more not so good thing about him. The good thing is he's Army Air Forces, but he is way more Army than Air Forces, in my opinion. And What I'm using
LeMay?
is the vignette. Pardon?
Kurt LeMay?
Curtis LeMay, yeah. I know he's not Army Air Forces. He's
Sure.
he's a general and he's not the commander of. The point I wanted to make is the vignette about him going onto Guam to have dinner with Nimitz, and it's like cocktails and servers and kind of Navy Admiral style. Yes, that's a fair criticism. And so he takes Nimitz, and what does he do? Go through the chow line with the regular Army Air Forces soldiers, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is my point: is he's more Army than Air Forces.
Mhm.
He was the Army Air Forces equivalent of a muddy boot general. So that's the good.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The not
He was
so
an
good
operator.
was
Sure.
he
Yeah,
was.
he's a tactical operator. And
The not so
although-
good, again, this goes outside our boundary of World War II, though, is he became a caricature in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With nuclear war and
Yeah.
kind of Dr. Strangelove-esque. And
Well, I hate to
he-
say it, but
Go ahead.
Pedro Deval does the same thing. I mean, he goes right off the deep end too. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of
So
sad.
it becomes, I don't know if they drank too much of their own Kool-Aid or what it was,
Right.
It's just one of those things where, they got drunk with success. And I mean, it's sad because I think it ruins his legacy.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Yeah. If you look at LeMay through the lens of 1945, let's say, until
Mhm.
the maybe early 60s, maybe the late 50s when he's in charge of SAC and everything else, and then of course beyond that, if you look at that small lens, he's an amazing human being. He's an amazing commander. He's an amazing leader. And people are going to think he's a war criminal. Oh, shut up! The guy did what he was there to do. That was his job.
Right.
As he so infamously said, you got to kill
There
enough
is
people.
nuance there. There is absolutely nuance there, but yeah, we have to be very, very careful about how that's framed.
Mhm.
Was what we did to Tokyo immoral? Absolutely.
Sure.
Was it necessary? Absolutely.
Sure.
So anyway,
I'm not saying it was the right thing to do, but it was a necessary thing to do.
It was the least bad thing to do.
All
right, other good shout outs. Really down in the batting order here. Desron 54's commander, Captain Jesse Coward at the Battle of Surigao Strait, rolling in late, saying, I'm gonna do some torpedo attacks. Do I have your permission to do that? And yeah, I mean that cat was ballsy. I really like him.
Yeah, horrible last name. The complete opposite of what his last name says. That guy had balls of solid steel.
Yeah,
and
just
he
wanted to give him a shout out.
Destroyer commanders are infamous for that kind of stuff, or famous for that kind of stuff. Ernest Evans.
Yeah.
I mean, guys that were not afraid to stick their nose in it.
Moosebrugger.
Time and Fred Moosebrugger.
Well, it's all a Taffy 3 for that matter. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, and I was getting to that too. I mean, you got to give props to Ziggy Sprague for going through a very tough scrape. That was an unpleasant morning, but he came through successfully. I would have to say he did absolutely as well as he could have. Props to his screening DD and DE skippers, and of course, getting a lot of birds up in the air relatively quickly. So good on him.
Another guy, if we're talking about Surigao Strait, or if we're talking about Leyte Gulf, we got to talk about Surigao Strait. We're talking about Oldendorf. Jesse Oldendorf, and this all, of course, comes into Coward and all this other stuff that goes into the play here. Oldendorf was like, okay, you want to come into the play and in my party, you bring everything you got, do what you need to do. And by the way, I'm just going to sit back here with my battleships and I'm going to put the coup de grace after my cruisers and my DDs go in there. He knew exactly what to do, exactly how to do it. And most importantly, didn't overstep, didn't try and force the battleship issue. Of course, we all know they get their licks in, but he didn't act as a battleship commander. He acted as a tactical commander and knew what was going down. Task force commander, and knew what to do and just let his people do their thing. And a nautical execution of biblical proportions was Surigao Strait.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Richard Close in Connolly.
Yep.
Got to give him his props. Great gunnery expert. beloved by the Marine Corps because he too was willing to take his ships in danger close and risk the scrapies upon their hulls and whatnot. So yeah, I like that guy.
If I remember correctly, he's in charge in the Marshall Islands at Kwajalein, I think.
Oh, okay.
I think. And either way, there's an episode where he orders Battleship Mississippi, a battleship, to close in close inshore. She is 600 yards offshore, a battleship, firing flat trajectory 14-inch rounds into these Japanese fortifications. And the Marines are like, this guy is awesome. And it's him. That's why they called him Close-In Connolly. But he brings in a battle wagon 600 yards offshore and just starts pumping 14 inches. That has got to be one of the most coolest sights ever seen by human eyes.
Right.
Is a battleship that close to shore, just pummeling stuff. And then two, to have the stones to bring something in there that close and not ground it or, take all kinds of fire like what the Colorado did, off of Tinian and all this, and just sit there and just pound the living bejesus out of that island. That guy was awesome.
My daughter does this very funny imitation of D-Day. And she starts out, knock, knock. It's America. And that's, it's America. Anyway, 600 yards away with a battleship. I mean, holy Moses. That's that is truly point blank range.
Boy, you ain't kidding.
Shout out for the Brits and Canadians. They were there too, before we get a comment.
Yes, good point.
And the Aussies.
Point. Yes.
Yeah.
Gotta get this straight.
Okay.
And the Kiwis.
Go ahead.
You got one?
Arleigh Burke. How can we, from his little beaver days on, all the way through, right? So on the staff, I mean, he just kind of adapted and.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you do see, some of these early war cats kind of coming back in different roles, like Jimmy Thatch, the innovator of the big blue blanket, another quality staff officer. A guy who evolves from being a really good fighter tactician to a bigger picture thinker and knew what he was doing. So
the relationship between Mitscher and Burke is fascinating because when Burke is initially assigned as Mitscher's second, Mitscher's like, oh hell no, I don't want this destroyer guy here.
This black shoe.
Yeah, right. And then Burke is like, oh hell no, I don't want to work with this guy. This guy's a jackass. He didn't want it. They did not like each other. But the situations forced themselves to be able to work together. And by the time you get to 40, especially 44, but especially 45, they're like this. They're buddies. They're the best of friends. And Mitscher heavily relies on Burke. And we talked about this a couple episodes ago. We were talking about the kamikazes when Mitscher is sick and he's like really sick.
He's running
whether he's got the flu or pneumonia or heart issues, God knows. But the dude is wrung out.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't. Chain smoking will do that to you. I mean, he's 60, but doesn't look a day over 80.
Exactly.
And he's about.
I don't think he was 60, maybe 55, and he looked 80. But go ahead.
But he doesn't hesitate, he lets Arleigh Burke do his thing. Like he puts complete and utter faith in Burke's ability to run not just a task group, but the entirety of Task Force 58. And basically just says, hey, Arleigh, wake me if you need me, do your thing. Right. I'm going to go get some friggin' sleep for about 4 days. And Arleigh Burke runs Task Force 58 flawlessly.
Yeah.
But there are airplanes in 58. How could that happen? Go ahead.
Because he's a smart cat, man. He's an innovator too. I mean, he's, you talked about Fred Moosebrugger. We're dipping into 43 here, but I mean, Moosebrugger and Arleigh Burke were cut from the same cloth. Innovative, fearless destroyer skippers. There's guys that were just bad to the bone.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to Lemuel Shepard, commander of
Lemuel.
Lemuel. Thank you. And also the 1st Marine Provisional Brigade at Guam, too, where he performed very well. A really innovative commander, again, well-liked by his subordinates and certainly by his co-workers, if you will, too. So Yeah, just wanted to give him his props. And then I guess the last two I would end with are sort of the ambiguous pair, and they're both on Okinawa.
Mm.
Ushijima and Simon Bolivar Buckner.
Whoa.
I don't know where to come down on either of those guys.
I do.
Oh.
Hit me.
I do.
Oh,
Ushijima was. Go ahead, Bill. Go.
No, I was just saying one of them ends up dead, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, they both do, technically.
Oh,
Yeah, both
eventually.
end up dead.
Yeah, but Ushijima was weak. He was a weak commander. We said this multiple times that if he had the stones that Kurabayashi had, or frankly, or Nakagawa or anybody else, he'd have sent Cho's ass back to Japan where he belonged.
Right.
Yeah.
And he didn't do that. And it's not like this is an Army Navy thing. These are two Army officers, and they're complete polar opposites. And Ushijima was weak. He, what's his name? Smith, Holland Smith said that Ushijima was a fine commander. And I guess when you're looking at it from the field aspect of it, maybe
that right. Yeah, no, I'm basically where you are too. That I think Ushijima was a decent human being overall, but no, just couldn't carry out the battle plan that needed to be carried out. So, yeah, he gets a C minus in my book, I think. And
Buckner,
then Buckner, go it.
No, I was going to say Buckner was a good human being. You know, he's a good leader of men, maybe to a point, but I think he took the Army approach of a slow plod. And I'm not knocking the Army by any means. I'm just saying they did things differently than the Marine Corps did. And I'm not saying that the Marine Corps would have done things differently, although they probably would have. Roy Geiger, in the brief time that he has command of that Army, does do things differently than Buckner did, with great success. And Buckner, I think, exacerbated some of the American casualties by taking such a slow approach, by not allowing a secondary amphibious invasion when you had the resources to do it.
Yep.
Although McManus would disagree with you on that one, but
I'm going to disagree with John, because the fact is that it's not Anzio. You're not facing the Hermann Göring Panzer Division here. You're not. You're not facing nothing anywhere near it.
Right.
And yes, they had a lot of artillery on Okinawa, but the Germans had a hell of a lot more of it at Anzio than and it's a different set of circumstances.
I'm basically with you. I think that you have to roll the dice and try maneuver.
Yeah.
And even if you get a beachhead that is kind of bottled up, it's just one more damn thing that the Japanese have got to keep an eye on, and it's going to pull them in two different directions. So
yes.
That's where I'm
at. The key is that it had worked before.
Right.
And Bruce is going, hey, let's do this again because we did it at Ormoc, and guess what? It worked.
Yeah.
And it was trending towards working again. I mean, it did distract. It was a little bit of a turning movement just on the feint. And, it would have drawn a whole lot more resources away, had they actually done the landing. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to have McManus on at some point, and he can fight all three of us.
So. Yeah. The only other guy I want to bring out, as I told, is Walter Krueger. John McManus again is a huge fan of Walter Krueger, and Krueger's a self-made man, and there's obviously something incredibly admirable about that. I feel you, but the guy was a wiener to his subordinates, and not to the rank and file. He was a soldier, true, but he was a slow, methodical, plodding guy. And I'm not going to put the onus of the Manila Massacre on his shoulders, because that would be unfair and inaccurate. But if he gives the spurs to Sixth Army, do they get there faster? And by there, I'm talking about Manila. Yes, they do. They do. Sure. There's no question. And does the shit show happen?
I don't know. I mean, you were just saying yourself that, of course, Iwabuchi had been digging in there for weeks. Sure. I mean, yes, the less time you can give him to do that, the better. I mean, that's just axiomatically true.
Yeah.
But God,
if he gives it the gas, which MacArthur is sitting there saying, go, to
Right.
Krueger, and if he does that, again, I'm not saying that civilians aren't killed, because they are, but
Yeah.
are they killed to such a degree? I don't know.
Yeah.
You'll never know. We'll never
We
know.
will
But the
never
fact of the
know.
matter is he could have gotten into Manila faster. Lives potentially could have been saved. A la, look at Robert Eichelberger. I mean, yes, he
Right.
runs into a stone wall down there in the south, but he's almost put in there a little too late to get to Manila, frankly. So,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Okay.
Actually, the other ambiguous figure that we have failed to talk about, and I will shut up after this, is Kurita Koryo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Why does he
Turn around.
turn around?
That's the big what if,
Mhm.
really. And
Mhm.
I honestly, my crystal ball is not good enough to figure that one out. I can't tell if he was brave or a coward or a fool or a hero for not sacrificing his men. I just go around and around on this one. I got to say.
I think, we go back to what I had said when we did Lady Golf, is that he knew that this was a sacrificial lamb sort of a thing. He
Yeah.
knew that I'm going to get my people killed unnecessarily. So he was one of those few Japanese admirals who believed it's like, why kill these people or get our people killed for nothing? And I think that, of course, there's that whole, did they see masts on the horizon? And that's, was that the fleet and all this other
Yeah.
stuff? And, people say that, Mark Still says that was probably fabricated, and it probably was, because
Yeah.
we didn't have any masts on the horizon. And,
Yeah.
that gives him his out to turn
Yeah.
around and get the hell out of there.
It's
Mhm.
Stilly, by the way. I
Stilly.
learned that down at the conference where
Not
I
bad.
had the pleasure of actually being on the same stage with Mark, who's done yeoman's work over the years.
Yeah,
So
yes.
that was nice to. But anyway, yeah, I just I keep going around on this one. So for those of
Bill, what
you
did
who think that historians always have an opinion, a definite opinion on everything, and this is one where I still keep scratching my head.
what do you think, Bill? I see you sitting there shaking your head.
No, I'm ambiguous as well, so I'm good. I do have a last name though, Seth.
Shoot.
If you're ready to move off that one. Let the record show that Toadi's last leader of World War II, of this episode anyway, is a soldier, Moosey. A dude,
Ooh,
a
Yeah.
dude that created a Ranger battalion out of whole cloth from a mule skinner battalion, and then led the greatest POW release of American history in the Philippines, Cabanatuan.
mhm.
And just, man, oh man, this is, and it's Hollywood stuff. They made a movie about it. So of course it's Hollywood stuff, but, but it is, right? And he just, does he disappear after this? I don't remember a thing about him
No.
following this raid.
You don't see much after. I mean, this is six Ranger battalions,
Mhm.
bellwether event. This is their thing. This is what they do
Yeah.
after this, and then it's pretty much. I mean, and this is what they do here, and then after this, they really don't have the opportunity to do a
Mhm.
whole hell of a lot, and it's hard to
Yeah.
eclipse that. I mean, come on, let's be real. It's hard
Yeah.
to eclipse
Mhm.
that, and that was a hell of an operation, and he led it, flawlessly, and
Yeah.
Musey was a hell of a guy,
Mhm.
incredible leader. Well, this was great fun.
Yeah.
It was.
I enjoyed
Yeah.
this.
Nice to not have to necessarily be prepared within an inch of your freaking life. Yeah.
I
Seth
agree.
Paradin gets to sit back and just, shoot the shiz with his buddies.
Shoot the hip, shoot from the hip.
Yeah.
Shoot from the hip. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, this is good. I'm looking forward to the Q&A that's coming up very soon. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I am too, because there's no wrong answers. We could just make it up.
Oh, and by the way, just to put it out there, Sean is not going to send us the questions. We're going in cold, which I'm fine with. I think that's going to be good.
That's great. Let's do it. That'll be good times.
It'll be fun.
We will be
All right.
making it up.
Yeah.
All right.
Probably. Anyway, anything else? Anybody else we want to talk about? I'm not sure. We'll do this again at some point, but this was good.
Yeah.
Good
That was
times.
fun.
All right. All right, well, cool. Well, with that, we want to thank you very much for listening in or watching to this episode of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Please give us a rating and review. If you got a question or a comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. We will be doing our Q&A very, very soon, and I hope you do have sent in your questions by now, because if you haven't, TS, too late. And I didn't, you know what the S stands for. But that being said, my name is Seth Barron, and I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. John, as always, my friend, thank you for being here.
Yeah, and I also wanted to just thank the listeners of this podcast who have gone out and signed up on my 1942book.com site. I've got almost 2,000 people signed up at this point. I'm super
awesome.
appreciative. And I'll be sending out an email blast fairly soon, trying to give you a little sneak preview of some of the things that you'll see in a book. But thank you very much. That's really heartwarming.
Awesome.
It's going to be a great book.
Hope so.
It will. It will. Can't wait to see it. Bill, bring us home.
And as a naval officer, I know that TS means top secret, which this podcast is not.
Not.
See you again next week.